I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back." Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him. "Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you." "Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now." Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Hi there, my name is Rick, and I recently moved into a new neighborhood, and it was one of the most horrible experiences in my life. I had gotten promoted at work a few months ago, and my income had grown enough that I felt very comfortable buying a small house and moving out of my small bachelor pad apartment. It had served me well for many years, but I had always wanted something bigger and to stop paying rent as well. And so, I started looking for a house that would fit my needs perfectly. One that especially had a fully fenced-in backyard, because I had also always wanted a dog as well. So when I found a cozy bungalow in a quiet neighborhood that was within my price range, I thought that I had found my dream home. But the problems started very quickly after I moved in. The day that I moved in, I met my neighbor Vince, and let's just say that we did not hit it off right away. Our driveways were right next to each other's, and I had just assumed that it wouldn't be a problem. But boy, was I wrong. I parked the moving truck I had rented on what I had thought was my driveway, but Vince thought differently. "Hi there, my name is Rick." "I don't care what your name is. Get that piece of crap off of my property." What? "Sorry, I really thought that I was far enough over with the truck. It's probably 10 feet from your property." "You could not be more wrong, bud. You can either move it or I will go into my house and get my gun and make you move it. Got it?" He looked like he was being serious, and so I jumped into the truck and moved it half onto my front lawn. After that, I moved my belongings into my house, and thankfully, I didn't see Vince for the rest of the day. But that one interaction was enough to make me very afraid of him, and I honestly didn't know what to do about him. I did call the police, but they told me that even though they had received word that he had threatened other people in the past, that they had no legal recourse against him since he hadn't waved his gun around. I found that incredibly infuriating, but friends of mine told me to just let it go for now, but to keep an eye on things and get the police involved should things get worse. Of course, it didn't take long for things to get worse though. A few weeks later, I came home to find both driveways full of vehicles, none of which I recognized. I knew that I should leave it alone, but I couldn't. I called the police and told them what had happened, and again, they told me that there was nothing they could do and that I needed to call and have the cars towed away if it bothered me that much. And so rather than confronting Vince, I called for a tow truck to remove the cars that were parked on my portion of the driveway. When it arrived and removed the first car, Vince and his friends rushed out of his house and confronted the tow truck driver. The owner of the car managed to convince the driver not to tow his car away and that he would move it. After that, the owners of the other cars moved their cars onto the street. Meanwhile, though, I ducked into my house so that I could avoid any conflict with either Vince or his friends, but they came and started pounding on my front door. "You coward! Why don't you come out here and face us like a man?" Why would I do that? There are 6 of you and only 1 of me. Maybe next time, you shouldn't be a jerk and only park on your own driveway. You made such a big deal about me being on yours in spite of the fact that my moving truck was only on my own. And then you park all over my driveway. What kind of self-centered ass are you? The previous owner didn't have a car, and they gave me free use of their driveway whenever I wanted, which means that I can do as I please. If you pull something like this again, I'll make sure it's the last thing that you ever do. After that, Vince and his friends left, but not before they keyed my car and smashed a couple of flower pots that I had on my front porch. When they were for sure gone, I called the police and reported what they had done, and shortly afterwards, 2 officers showed up. One came and spoke to me, while the other went to talk to Vince and his friends. However, after they gathered both our statements, the cops told me that there still wasn't anything that they could do. Vince had more witnesses that backed up his side of the story, and since I didn't have any way to prove that they had parked on my driveway or had threatened me and destroyed my property, then it was my word against his, and unfortunately, he had witnesses. I was enraged by that point. My own neighbor had threatened my life twice now, and the police refused to do anything. I couldn't help but wonder, what did he have to do for them to finally do their damn jobs? After that, things were fairly quiet, and while I wondered how long it would last, I enjoyed the peace and quiet and decided that one thing that would help me feel better would be for me to finally get a dog. If nothing else, having a pet would help me to relax and enjoy my new home. And so, I went down to the shelter and found the cutest puppy there and brought him home. It took some effort, but the dog took very well to being trained, and shortly after coming home with me, he was housebroken, and we began to play in my backyard every night after I got home from work. Things were really beginning to look up, but of course, my happiness would be short-lived. After all, I lived next door to a psychopath. One day on the way home from work, I picked up some new toys for my puppy and was looking forward to playing with him when I got home, but I found my house empty. I searched high and low for him, but could not find him anywhere. I knew that he had to be in the house or the backyard, as there was no way for him to get out. I examined every square inch of the fence to make sure there were no holes in it, and after looking it over twice, I was at a loss for words. That's when I heard it. From Vince's house, I heard the faint sound of a dog barking, while I had no way to know for sure that it was my dog. I knew that Vince did not have a dog of his own, and that he was crazy enough to kidnap mine. I knew that he must have lured my dog through the doggy door and had kidnapped him from my backyard while I was at work. On the one hand, I could call the police and ask them to try to get my dog back, but Vince could just say that it was his dog, and then it would be my word against his once again. So instead, I waited until I saw Vince leave his house. Once I knew he was gone, I jumped over our fence, and using a hammer and a crowbar, I broke into his house through his back door. I then followed the sounds of my dog barking and found him locked up in Vince's basement. I busted the lock on the door and freed him and took him back home. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when Vince got home, but I decided that I would call the police and tell them that I saw some random person break into Vince's house while he was gone. I was smart enough to wear a mask and gloves, so I knew that should they investigate that, at the very least, they wouldn't find evidence that I had done it. Or at least that was my hope. And that the police told me that they would be over in a few minutes, but Vince arrived first. He stormed into his house, and after a minute, I heard him scream out in anger from inside my own house. Scared, I went to peek out my window and saw him run out of his house armed with rifle and then head towards my house. I hid and prayed that the police would soon arrive, and as he pounded on my door, they thankfully did. "I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back." Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him. "Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you. Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now." Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Minutes later, the neighborhood was swarming with police and paramedics. Neither Vince or the cop were dead, but both were very badly injured and were rushed to the nearest hospital. Once they were gone, the remaining police asked me questions, and I stuck to the story about a stranger breaking into Vince's house. They already knew about our relationship and that Vince was notorious for being hostile and unstable. When they didn't find my fingerprints or signs that I was the one that broke into the house, they believed my story. I was so incredibly grateful, but I had decided that I was done. There was no way that I was going to take a chance and stay there any longer. I had no idea what was going to happen to Vince, and on the odd chance that he was going to be returning to his house, I decided that I was done living there, and I listed my house for sale. It didn't take long for me to sell my house, and I actually managed to make a little bit of profit on it, which was unexpected. I took my money and I moved across the country to a quiet dead-end street. Thankfully, my job was able to transfer me to the office that was closest to my new house, which made things easy for me. It didn't hurt that my new neighbors were young families and were extremely friendly and welcoming. It took a few months, but I eventually felt at home and safe and happy that I had gotten far away from Vince. As for him, though, that day went very badly for him. The cop that had shot him permanently injured his hip, which meant that Vince would not only have chronic pain in his hip for the rest of his life, but that he needed a walker in order to walk, and even then, it was very difficult for him. However, that was the good news for him. He had finally crossed the line, and having shot a police officer, he had the book thrown at him, and he was sentenced to prison for 15 years. While in prison, he had been forced to declare bankruptcy, and he had lost his house. Hearing that made me feel silly for selling mine so quickly, but the peace of mind that doing so brought me was worth it. After all, I didn't want any of Vince's friends to come looking for me to get revenge on his behalf. So in the end, the police finally did do their jobs, but I'll be honest, I'm still a bit angry that it took Vince shooting someone before they finally did anything, although I do feel a little guilty. After all, if I hadn't broken into his house to get my dog back, that officer wouldn't have been shot, but there's no way of knowing what would have happened instead. I'm just glad to finally be living in my dream house with lovable puppy and having friendly and most importantly sane neighbors. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.